Good morning. I hear myself. Can you hear myself? See what I did there? Welcome to the Paris Fair and the GitHub Universe if you came late. Hopefully you're here to learn about continuous integration and continuous deployment with GitHub's API, because that's what I'm talking about. So if you're here for that, you're in the right place. I'm very happy to be here. This is actually my third universe of the 4, but first time as a GitHub employee. So I'm really honored to be speaking about GitHub's API as an employee, because I did that as a non-employee last year. So show of hands, I know 80% of GitHub users are outside the US. Raise your hand if you came outside the US to come to GitHub Universe. I'm curious. OK, cool. We won't do the whole who came the furthest thing. We'll just get right to the talk. But I want to be the first to welcome you to the Bay Area. I know Jason had talked about the Palace of the Fine Arts. We're right next to the Golden Gate Bridge. So if you guys didn't know that, it's right outside. So definitely check it out if you do have time. It's quite a sight. It's actually, we're having some of the best weather this week, too, as well. So if you are from outside the Bay Area, definitely take advantage of that if you can. But go to all the talks, too, as well. Cool. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Brian Douglas. I'm a developer advocate on the developer relations team at GitHub. These are all my social profiles. It's also what I look like on the internet and GitHub. So that's what I look like. But my role as a developer advocate, I get this question a lot, especially at GitHub. People aren't sure what a developer advocate, evangelist, developer relations, like what they do at GitHub. We have over 900 employees. And when GitHub first started 10 years ago, everybody was an advocate. And now we have focused roles, and my role is actually focused on the API and ecosystem. So a lot of what you heard earlier today in the keynotes is the stuff I get to tinker around with and share with you guys. But to better describe my role, I like to call myself the Beyonce of GitHub. So I'm Queen Bee. So GitHub has a lot of users. We have 31 million developers, users, designers, product managers using our platform. So I get to constantly talk to you guys about our product and get your experiences. But I also get to ask this question to myself every single day, which is, what would Bay do? So this will be our theme for today, if you guys are tracking. But for me, and what I do as a developer advocate at GitHub is I go to bat for the Hive. So Beyonce is she's a superstar. Let's just say that she does a really good job at what she does. She also has a very large superfan group, probably teetering around the same number as GitHub users. But she is constantly always reaching out to her fans. She always turns back and hears her fans. And she also is doing a really good job of bringing up the next wave of singers into stardom through Beyonce's mentoring program, which I won't talk anymore about Beyonce. But what I'm really focused on is, how is your experience? I really want to know this. So if you did get my Twitter profile, it's also in the corner. Reach out to me. Tell me your questions. Share your interactions with the GitHub API. I'd love to focus on those and hear your interactions. So speaking of which, the GitHub API. GitHub API, as Jason mentioned this morning, GitHub's been around for 10 years. The API has been around for 10 years. So the GitHub API is our product. We created the API a few months after we launched pull request, mainly to talk to integrators. All our sponsors, all the people that we represented on stage earlier today are our partners, including yourselves, developers. So we want you to have a better interaction, a better experience with the API. And with that being said, my focus of my talk is about continuous integration and continuous deployment. And these are our tools really to give us the peace of mind. So continuous integration, we have the opportunity to push our code to GitHub, and stuff happens. Like, we don't have to run our tests. I came from a team a couple companies ago where our test suite ran 45 minutes. That's something I don't want to have to sit in front of my computer and run the test. I want the CI to run that for me. So I went with tools like Travis and Circle. So briefly, this is what we'll cover. We'll cover architecting CI, a bit of an overview. Continuous integration is not something new. We talk about this every year at Universe. A lot of companies are using this. I'll run through a quick diagrams of explaining that process to kind of support my talk. I also want to talk about the Checks API, which is in developer preview as of earlier this summer, and show you how you can better integrate your apps and your workflow into GitHub's API. Also, our deployments API I'll mention. Deployments has been around for a very long time. Since 2014, we launched it. But we actually shipped some new features, which I'll talk about as well. And then I'll talk about some dashboards as well. So continuous integration deployments, some of this might be a review for you guys. But continuous integration, it's all about the pipeline. Like, we're all about Git workflows. Continuous integration gives you a pipeline where you don't have to worry about your test running. You don't have to worry about how your staging and your deployment environments are getting shipped to production or the staging. And this is really based on the backbone of automation. Like, there's no reason for us to sit 45 minutes in front of our computers. 45 minutes an hour, it's barely 6 times. Anybody work 8 hours a day? Cool. Anybody work more than 8 hours a day? I don't want to spend my entire time as a developer running tests. Like, that's pretty painful. So ship that to your CI system, use parallelization so you can run that test suite in like maybe a couple minutes if possible. And the cool thing about CI is that it's all built in the backbone of source control. Now, I'm going to make an assumption that a lot of us in the room are GitHub users, right? Maybe you guys are using Git. You guys roll your own stuff still? Well, if you aren't using GitHub, you should definitely use it. Hopefully you are since you're here. But because you use GitHub as the start of your version control and your interaction with your team, you get to unlock a lot of different cool features as part of your workflow and your solution for you contributing to your code base. And as Jason mentioned earlier, too, Jason kind of just stole a lot of stuff I was going to mention, so I'm going to keep referring to Jason. But last year, 2 years ago, we launched GitHub Apps. GitHub Apps are a better way to integrate with our API, and we give a lot of stuff out of the box for GitHub Apps. And with GitHub Apps, we also launched Marketplace, which is a really awesome place for you to collaborate, share your projects, but also use other projects from large companies and teams as well. One of my favorite GitHub apps that are out there, actually, that just joined Marketplace not too long ago, is PullReminders. PullReminders is an awesome GitHub app built by one developer just like you guys in the audience, who had an idea of, he was working on a development team, and he wanted people to look at his pull requests. So he built a tool, first integrating with Slack and then later with GitHub, to notify your team of a pull request that was ready for review, which was his pull request. It's a nice, gentle nudge. I used to always throw GIFs and @mention people. Now we have a proper review system within pull requests, so it's a little easier that way. But the creator of PullReminders is actually here today, and we'll be speaking tomorrow on the same stage I'm standing on. So definitely check out Abi, hear about his story and how he switched tracks and careers. Switched jobs to work on this full time, and his experience is pretty awesome. But in Abi's example, he was able to build a GitHub app to fit his use case with the GitHub API for a feature that did not exist on GitHub. This is pretty key. Like, we have a lot of developers. We want to ship features as fast as possible, but we can't address every single need. So I'm here to hear your complaints, your wins, but I'm also just going to document those in issues and PRs, hopefully, eventually. But with Abi, he was able to identify exactly where in his GitHub app he needed access to GitHub's data. Now, historically, at OAuth apps, we opened up the box to everything on GitHub. So we'd have to have, for your repositories, we'd have to have access to organization repositories, which is uncomfortable for some people for good reason. With GitHub Apps, you could actually just present API data for just the interactions you need. So obvious use case, he uses pull requests. So he's able to get fine-grained permissions and granular positions for only pull requests alone. So moving on from the source control, talk about the build process, too, within the CI pipeline. The build, I have a big old red X on my build stage. And I think a lot of us, at first, when we see the failure, we kind of get like, oh, man, what happened? But having failures as part of you pushing to Git and getting notified automatically, that's a good thing. Like, you want to fail fast, right? You want to find out if something's wrong, if something's not kosher based on your linting scripts or your testing tools. You want to know as quickly as possible, so you can address that as quickly as possible, too. I'm not a big fan of shipping on Fridays, but if it was on a Friday and on 3 o'clock, don't do that, by the way. But if you did ship on a Friday, like, you want to know before you walk out the office to go enjoy yourself for the weekend. So in this talk, I haven't talked about Beyonce since the first couple of slides, but I think there's a perfect quote that Beyonce is actually probably quoted for the most about, which is, if everything was perfect, you would never learn, you would never grow. And the cool thing about CI systems and having tests built in and linting scripts built into your process is that you're constantly learning and you're growing. I came from an engineering team as well a couple of companies ago, where we spent our entire engineering syncs for like an hour and a half talking about how to space our JavaScript and whether or not to use CoffeeScript over the next ES6 at the time. We just threw all those conversations out the door by adding linting to our CI build system. GitHub actually did this earlier this year. Early in the summer, we launched this, but we actually removed jQuery from our github.com. Just a public blog post that went out a couple months ago. But the way we did this is actually, I'm not sure if you guys are a fan of jQuery, if anybody using it, but that wasn't really the issue. The issue was that we had to make a decision on how we were going to move forward with how we write JavaScript. And rather than constantly have engineering things and talk about jQuery, it's OK, it works, it does great things, the engineering team was able to build a linter directly within our CI workflow and check for jQuery inline inside a pull request. And the best part about this is that if you wrote any jQuery, it actually provided suggestions from our CI and our bots of how to write the same jQuery in JavaScript using those native interactions. So it makes the process of like identifying, I know how to do this in jQuery, but I don't know what the native commands are in JavaScript. The bots actually give that to you by default, which is super awesome. I found this while preparing for this talk. I found this on Reddit, and I thought this was like the perfect antidote for the perfect CI and CD workflows. I'm not sure. This is probably somewhere in the Midwest. I'm just guessing by the nice greenery. But for whatever reason, this guy really wants to put logs. He wants to ship logs to his basement. And the best way to do this is by building automation into his system. So, I mean, the next step is basically getting a robot to do this for him, or maybe just using some sort of app on his phone to ship logs to his house. I'm not sure if that's a thing, but you guys have an idea, you can run with it. So, not sure if you're going to get funded, though. So moving along, I really want to talk about our first API, which we shipped earlier this summer, which is the checks API. Show of hands, anybody using the checks API directly with their applications? Very cool. All right, see some familiar sweaters as well, or hoodies. The checks API is the successor, not even the successor, it's the more advanced version of our existing status API. So we provide way more context to your code and your CI systems. And this is a brief example of this. So you actually get sophisticated feedback within your PR. So very similar to what we were talking about with the jQuery example, and checking your jQuery code, and then providing those annotations within your check system on your pull request tab. You can do that with our checks API. So this is available today in developer preview for you guys to tinker with and find out ways to improve your developer workflows. One of our partners, Travis CI, is one of our first CI systems to actually use the checks API. So they're actually using this today. So if you install Travis on a new repo, you will be using their new GitHub app that uses the checks API system. And great part about this is Travis really, among other solutions, they can really encompass this entire build step and then some too as well by having this part of your CI workflow. So once you push to GitHub, your test will then run on Travis, and you can find out all information, annotations within your pull request. And the cool thing about this is, like, historically, and this is still true, like, you can still go to travisci.org and look at your failures, your passing, look at all your repos. But we're now bringing that information. Travis has now partnered with us and brought that information native to your pull request. So this is just a screenshot of that same summary information to get quick insights of what failed, what passed inside of github.com. And then you can also click through and see way more details by clicking through to Travis. So I missed my last slide. But now that we have the checks API system, I asked the question, what would Bay do? All right. Sorry, I didn't really set I just ruined my punchline by doing that. But what Beyonce would do is she would open up a pull request with her lyrics for the song Check On It. You guys a big fan of Pink Panther back in '06? Yeah, so this was her song in Pink Panther. The movie wasn't that great, so not a lot of people know about the song for fair reason, but it's a great song. And I opened up a pull request on one of my repos. I've created a Markdown file, and I added the lyrics to Beyonce's song to my PR. Now, I wanted to test out the checks API system, and the great thing about at GitHub, we have lots of people shipping code. So one of my coworkers actually shipped a GitHub app that uses our checks API and the Alex linter. If you're not familiar with the Alex linter, it actually checks your code for insensitivity and your wording. So if you're using strong language that maybe is not suitable in most situations, Alex will actually give you annotations and let you know what's a better use of the word. So I went ahead and installed this onto my repo with my Beyonce lyrics. And already I noticed that I do have a new tab on my PR screen, which is the checks tab. And within the checks tab, I can then see all these annotations on the uses of words. So for example, gender-based pronouns might not be a good thing having in your code, maybe in your documentation. For Beyonce lyrics, I'm not sure if Alex actually built this for Beyonce lyrics, but I think having girl and boy in your song for a reason is OK. But it might not be OK for your team. So you can actually set up checks and sort of have the balance of what sort of language you're looking for, what sort of language you would like in your documentation. So I think one of the best examples I always do is I always look for the word simply. Like you can just simply go to use the checks API. If you don't like that in your documentation, check for the word simply and then provide a recommendation. And then we have these annotations here to also provide that the response from Alex as well inside of our PR. So I'm just going to briefly run through some of our endpoints too for the checks API. First new thing as part of the checks API is the check run. Self-explanatory, these are our runs that we can run our annotations for the checks API. So if you want to do linting, you want to do dependency checking on your code, if you want to provide suggestions, you would first want to set up a checks run to then analyze your code and perform that linting. The second thing you'll need to know about is there's a check suite. Now, check suites is a collection of check runs. So it's a suite that's associated to your pull request. And that's attached to either by your tag or your head SHA. So basically the original commit that created the pull request that's attached to our API. And that's how we'd identify it. So by default, all PRs today have the check suite initiated. So you'll have a tab start. If it's not today, it'll be rather soon if you haven't opted into our preview. And then you'll see new checks. So you can now add checks to your PRs. And more diagrams. So this is the workflow for the checks API. By default, as I mentioned, check suite is created at the initiation of your push. And then you'll run a check run event. So you can have as many check run events as you would like onto your PR. So if these are custom actions, as we had mentioned before, the GitHub Actions that we launched today, or if these are GitHub Apps that are going to start doing some checks for you, you can also do that as well. And then after the check runs, you're going to be able to send statuses back up to your UI. So whatever status or annotations you want to send back to your UI, you can do this today with the GitHub API. And if you wanted to test it out as well, you could also test it by just simply using curl or even our GraphQL API using the GraphQL Explorer if you're a GraphQL fan. And this is just another close-up of what I was talking about using the gender-based pronoun and providing a suggestion of maybe using the word kid instead of girl. I'm not sure if that rhymes within Beyonce's scheme of her rhyming scheme, but it might help you as an artist. Other cool thing is that you can also set up clicking through to your annotations inside of your checks API. So if there's a specific line that you would like to provide suggestions, which is a new feature that we shipped very recently, you can actually click through, provide suggestions if your checks API or your check suite is not already doing it for you. You can also provide suggestions through our API as well. So I think the possibilities of what you can do as far as checking your code, we have a lot of examples we had run through just now. But I would love to hear your examples. Definitely reach out to me. My Twitter handle's at the bottom. But we're not done. I'm going to talk about the deployments API as well. So deployments API is something I mentioned. It's been around since 2014. It's something that a lot of our partners and integrators are using today. But we had shipped some new features out today. So let me just talk about this. But before I talk about the deployments API, I want to talk about my personal experience. So I keep mentioning this company I work for. The company I work for, we're only 10 engineers. And it was here in San Francisco. It was actually the company that moved me to the Bay Area. Oh, hello. So it's the company that moved me to the Bay Area. So it was a very small team. We were still figuring it out. We had just got funded. That's why they hired me. I was part of that sort of onboarding process. But we had a lot of problems in the way we ship code. For one, we didn't have staging environments. So I was part of the team to actually create staging environments. And the way we did this is that we created a staging environment. We were set up on Heroku. And we created staging environments at the time, we had 4 staging environments, not pictured as Mo. But each staging environment was named by a Simpsons character. I think there's 2 of the hardest problems as developers today and engineers. One is N+1 queries, and the other one's naming things. So once we started naming things Simpsons characters, we just kept going at it. I think by the time we left, we had like 6 staging environments. But this was a very manual process. So every morning, I would wait when I had a feature at the end of the sprint to have my stakeholders review, my product managers, marketing team. I'd have to run our Arc command. So we use Arc on the command line to sort of help with our deployment process. And very similar to Hub if you guys use that. But I would have to check Arc and check which stagings are available, and I would grab that staging, because we had a script to basically wipe out all stagings. So that way, if anybody claimed a staging environment, we had to make it fair to like anybody who came in early or logged in from home could grab one. So literally, that's what happened. Like there were no staging environments by 8 a.m. Because everybody was just really wanted to ship their code really fast. So I would run Arc with staging, find out what staging environments. So I see Homer is available. I grab Homer using another arc command, and then I go about my day, and I continue to ping people in Slack and say, look at my code, look at my code, look at my code. And this is super problematic because we only had, at the time, 4 staging environments and 10 engineers. So we constantly had this like weird battle of like, why is this staging environment like? And then we had some people who really knew how to use Arc and the command line, and they would basically just own staging environments for the whole week through scripting. Small team, but people had a lot of free time, apparently. So this is problematic. So I always had the pain point. I always wanted the opportunity to basically, when I open a pull request, I want a staging environment. Like, I'm ready. The code's ready for review. I know engineering's going to take some time to review code and QA. And I also want to have that ready to go so that I can start talking to my stakeholders and product managers. So as a developer, I wrote this. I want to trigger deploys as the pull request is open so I can offline staging management to my automation, my CI automation. And the great thing about that is today there's a lot of different tools you could do for this, including Heroku, as I mentioned. At that time, Heroku shipped their review app process and their pipeline workflow, so that's available to you today. There's a company that I like, which is Netlify, which they do this by default. So they're using our deployments API at GitHub to ship a pull request for every push. So not just ship a staging environment for every push. So including branches, pull requests, as well as production. So if you have a commit push for any sort of reason, you will have a staging environment ready for you. And they provide that link to the staging environment directly within our status API checks. So just for my example, like we do have a lot of different deployment strategies that you can use. GitHub is here to, you use whatever's best. Like, we just want to get you shipping code as fast as possible. For my use case, I use Netlify, and Netlify now solves my problem for making up Simpsons names or trying to keep up to date with whatever season 31 Simpsons are doing and creating new staging environments. Like that, now that is solved for me with the deployments API. And it looks like this. So based on a push event, I can set up a webhook. I can set up a GitHub app. I can now, as of today, set up a GitHub action as well to watch for a webhook and then create a deployment event. So from there, I create a deployment event. I trigger my third-party service, which for this use case, it's Netlify. Netlify triggers the deploy. Netlify then responds back to GitHub with the status, so whether the deploy failed, the build failed, or if it succeeded. I will then either provide deploy logs directly from that event, or I can have a URL with my staging environment ready to go and presented it with me. And then finally, on the deployment completion, like I get overall status, I have a status event, and I'm updated it within my GitHub CI. Other cool thing I want to mention, and the reason why I chose Netlify, is that they're also using the checks API natively within their application. So Netlify has a lot of different features, which I won't cover today. I'll cover one of them, that are using checks to basically, they're running their own checks on their system, and they're providing that data back to GitHub to then be able to present within our CI system. Within our PR requests. Like, yeah, exactly. We don't have a CI system. We use other CI systems. So as I mentioned, Netlify is using checks. Netlify has this feature called redirects. So because it's a static deployment tool, which I did not mention, you can actually set up redirects natively within the Netlify dashboard. You can also do that within your code. So you can create a redirect file, which I've done. So I created a redirect file. I incorrectly wrote a redirect. And then you can already see Netlify's checks usage now prevents me and says, hey, your redirects it's not going to work if you deploy this. So you want to actually check out our docs to find out exactly what you did wrong. If I did something a little more complicated, they provide annotations based on what I did wrong and maybe suggestions on how to fix it. So with that being said, that's our deployments API. I didn't mention specific things that we've updated. So everything I mentioned has all been existing since 2016. One of the newer things, a couple new things that we've added, we added a new status which is inactive. So it's possible that you want to deploy something to staging, but some services do limit you on how many instances you have open. So you can now set up inactive. So after a week, a couple days, you can set inactive to this staging environment. You can also set inactive on the close of pull request. So if the pull request is closed, there's no need for that staging environment. Go ahead and set that environment to inactive. And whether or not you want to use their API, the third-party service, you can also delete that staging environment as well. A couple other things too as well is that we do have two different attributes, one being the log URL and the other one being the environment URL. So now you can set the staging environment, so the URL, the public URL you want to share with the rest of your team, and you can also set up a log URL as well. So now that distinction exists for you. Previously, everybody was using the same attribute to set up a URL. So I say all this, and I still haven't mentioned one of our biggest ships, too, for Deploy's API, which is the deployment dashboard. So now natively, along with checks, you do have access to all your deploys. So any deploy that you're associating with the status, you now can look at your deployment dashboard. And I think one of the coolest things that we got this, by default, because we ship GitHub Pages, and that's a feature that we have, all GitHub Pages sites now have a deployment dashboard. So previously, if you guys have used GitHub Pages, you'd have to kind of sort of figure out whether it failed, whether it build succeeded. Now you can actually see this directly within GitHub and get more sophisticated checks on your GitHub Pages site. So take a little break and talk about Beyonce just a sec. Beyonce would probably want to use this deployments API to do whatever her own thing is. I didn't think of a really cool deployment strategy for Beyonce, so I created a different GitHub app, which is LogFi. So by default, Netlify hasn't actually updated yet as of today to using our deployments dashboard because we just shipped it today. So I built a little GitHub app, which is called LogFi, to also build deployments, to add deployment statuses to your dashboard as of today. So if you it's not the best code. I definitely wrote it on Sunday. But if you want to use this, you can also, if you haven't Netlify installed, go ahead and install LogFi, and your logs will actually be populated every time something's deployed. And this is something I built as a GitHub app, too, as well. So some other details I'd mention, too, as well. The environment URL, if you use that, it will present in within your deploy logs a nice little button that says View Deployment, aptly named. And you can actually view your deployment live in production, too. You could also, cool thing with GitHub Pages as well, which I didn't mention, you could also see histories of what shipped as far as what you deployed on GitHub Pages, so your entire history is available to you within your deployment dashboard. And with that being said, we now have a fully automated pipeline. Like I talked about staging, that was my use case, that was my problem, but you now have production as part of your CI platform. So if you want to set up an event to, whenever something's merged, deploy to production, you can set up that natively. So I know a lot of our tools and a lot of our partners have this by default. If you merge a pull request, you'll have a deploy. But if you are using a tool, or if you're rolling, basically building your own AWS clusters and Docker containers, you could also set that up as part of your CI workflow strategy. And all you have to do is know how to use the API. Also mentioning that a lot of the newer features are developer preview. So you do have to add a header tag to basically use some of these features. One feature as well, I mentioned GitHub Apps. You get a nice GitHub performed by GitHub object if you do use a GitHub app to do your deploys. So just keep that in mind. I know Zeit also had some time on stage talking about actions too as well. And I'm a fan of Zeit, so I wanted to make a mention that they also ship their GitHub app. So you can also, based on pull requests, you also have a review. Part of your pull request, you can have a staging environment for your pull request. And of course, Zeit also doesn't have logs yet, so I built a cool app that's called Now That's a Deploy. Sort of playing off that whole now that's what I call music. But anyway, sorry, my dad joke sort of fell flat. But so I built an app, so if you are using Now, also very simple, 20 lines of code. If you would like to use that, definitely check that out. With that being said, like the GitHub API, as I mentioned before when I first started, it's been around for 10 years. It's here to empower you. So if there's something that we're missing, or there's an edge case that you would like to see in GitHub, it's quite possible you could also build it yourself and share with others. Very similar to what I mentioned with Abi and building his own solution for PullReminders. You could do the same thing. So I'd love to hear your use cases and hear what sort of things you're building as well. So definitely hit me up. Some next steps. You're probably wondering, how can I get started? How can I start using the API stuff? You're probably like, I already know where to go, and that's developer.github.com. So all of our docs are available at developer.github.com. There you can play with what I haven't mentioned yet, which is the GraphQL API as well. We do have GraphQL Explorer, which is available to you to be able to tinker with. We do keep up to date with change logs, so definitely keep track of our changes tab on the developer.github.com, so you can find out quicker before going in the universe once a year when we do make changes. Also on this site is a QuickStart guide. So my coworker who's based in Amsterdam wrote a QuickStart guide on how to get started with the GitHub app. So if you're curious of what a GitHub app is, how to build one, you can just check out QuickStart Guide to building a GitHub app. The tutorial itself is based in Ruby, but we do have links for other languages as well. If you happen not to be a Ruby developer, I think Ruby is enough to, you could probably sort of figure your way through. We also give you all the code to write to as well, so it's a lot of copy and pasting. I'm a big fan. I see a Stack Overflow shirt over here. I'm a big copy and paster. And with that being said, too, as well, The next step for that, if you're interested in actually playing out the Checks API demo, I don't have a screenshot, but it's a super long URL. You can check out the Checks API Ruby demo, which is the successor to the QuickStart guide for getting a GitHub app. It will then give you some code to actually integrate checks with your system, and then you can ship that to whatever you would like to do as part of your workflow. Other thing, if you want to take a picture of this slide as well, all the apps that I shipped, the code is available on GitHub, open source, for free to you. So if you do want to see exactly what I did and how my interactions, definitely check that out. Those are the URLs, as well as my coworker who built the linter, Alex. We did get a mention of this on stage too today, which is Probot. Probot's a really good way if you're into JavaScript and Node. It's a lot of pre-built stuff for you for free to get your GitHub app started rather quickly. We also have a CLI, which you'll find in the Probot docs, which is Create Probot App. Aptly named from the Create React app. It's basically mirrored right after that if you use React at all, as well as a couple other tools that also copy that. I think Ember is actually the original creator of the CLI, or the front-end app CLI. And so check out Probot if you just want to get started. Or if there's an app that you haven't found in the Marketplace, there's a good chance that the app itself is on the Probot docs. So we have a lot of our community members. Probot is open source, technically created by a Hubber, but also open source and maintained by a community of developers around the world. I didn't have time because by the time I got Actions access, I didn't have time to build an example. But keep in mind, because it's the GitHub API and Actions are built on top of webhooks within the GitHub API, there's probably a use case where you don't need a GitHub app and you just want to build it for your own team's workflow. You can build a GitHub action to interact with your workflow and build that. So all these deployment strategies and things I've mentioned, you also build as a GitHub action. So I encourage you to sign up for the beta and sign up on that site that we provided today. I also run the GitHub developer program too as well. So if the blog's not enough and you want to talk to me on a regular basis, you can sign up for the GitHub developer program by going to this URL. I have this quote: "It takes a community to build great stuff." So definitely check that out. We do a monthly newsletter. I promise that's the only email you'll see from me once a month. And we just provide way more context around our APIs, examples, and you'll hear from a lot more community members through that as well. Speaking of community, we also have the GitHub community. So if there's something that you're looking or you just need some technical help or support, check out GitHub's community support forum. We have an entire team that's helping to support GitHub and support GitHub and the API and ecosystem. So definitely check that out. And with that being said, this is all my social profiles. If you want to reach out to me, again, I'm a developer advocate at GitHub. I really want to talk to you. I want to hear your use cases. I might be walking around with the microphone doing a podcast, so if you do see me, feel free to come up and I'll ask you some questions. And thank you for coming to Universe.